This is a lecture about sleep. In this lecture, we're going to discuss mostly the stages of sleep and then a little bit about the disorders of sleep. Before we go through any information, I'd like you guys to take a quick little quiz about what you know or what you think you know about sleep. These are true-false statements. So, question 1, true or false? When people dream of performing some activity, their limbs often move in concert with their dream. Just jot down in a sheet of paper next to you or something whether you think it's true or false, or just keep your answer in your head. Question 2. Older adults sleep more than young adults. True or false? Question 3. Sleepwalkers are acting out their dreams. Is that a true statement or a false statement? Question 4. Sleep experts recommend treating insomnia with an occasional sleeping pill. True or false? And finally, some people dream every night, others seldom dream. Is that a true statement or a false statement? Think you've got it? Okay, so the correct answer for each one of these is false. Every single statement here is false. There is not a true statement on this slide. For more on that, we're going to go into it in this lecture, and then some of these you'll have to look at more in your book. Let's start with the basics about what is sleep. A really good place to start is, do you think we sleep because of our biology, or do you think we sleep because that's just what is expected of us? When you go to sleep at night, does your body force you to fall asleep, or do you go to sleep at night because that's just the way you've been raised? Well, sleep is extremely biological. In fact, it is called a biological rhythm. Now, a biological rhythm is something your body has many different kinds of. So, for example, you probably eat at similar times every day. That's a rhythm. If you're a woman, you probably menstruate. That's a rhythm. So every 28 days you would have your menstrual cycle. Birds migrate every season or 6 months. They fly one place or another. Bears hibernate, where they sleep for a handful of months over a season. So there's various biological rhythms where they could be daily rhythms, they could be monthly rhythms, they could be yearly rhythms, but they're all biologically driven. Sleep is just like that. In fact, sleep is so important it has its own name for its rhythm. It is what's called a circadian rhythm. So whenever you hear that term circadian rhythm, that's the idea that you're falling asleep and waking up on a rhythm. There are many other things that happen in our body that seem to be linked to circadian rhythms. So for example, your body temperature rises and falls at various times during the day, and it always kind of peaks and drops at the same times each day. There's chemicals in your body, for example, melatonin, triglycerides, and different things like that, that rise at certain times and fall at other times. And they seem to be very rhythmic. That is, they're always peaking at about the same time. Melatonin, for example, peaks at about 4 o'clock in the morning, your melatonin levels. Now back to that idea of the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm, again, is just this special name for the sleep cycle, your sleep biological rhythm. It seems to be controlled by biological things, such as your hormones. So for example, when you are very young, let's say under 10, before puberty, most of the time these young kids are waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, very, very, very early, and going to bed probably pretty early as well. But once you hit puberty, once you start becoming an adolescent, they start shifting so that they stay up a little later. That seems to be driven by hormones. Other things that control your circadian rhythm include like light, so it's very hard to sleep when it's bright out. It's a lot easier to sleep when it's dark out. Noises can control your circadian rhythms. It's a lot easier to sleep when it's quiet compared to when it's loud. And these things do change as you age. So the two birds that are on this slide, the top one is the owl. That's for night people. They're called night owls. And typically you're going to see from about teenage years until maybe 20, 30 somethings where they are night owls. They stay up later in the evening and usually don't mind sleeping in. Very, 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 very little kids and very old adults, 40 and up usually, are considered morning people usually. So these are shown by the bird there called the lark. Now when you sleep, do you progress through various stages or are you pretty much just asleep? Well, it turns out that different times throughout the night you're actually doing different things in your sleep. There are in fact 5 stages of sleep to be aware of for this class. The first 2 stages are known as stage 1 and stage 2, and your brain waves during this stage are very, very, very quick, kind of similar to being awake. Then you'll progress to stage 3 and stage 4, where your brain waves are longer and slower, and this is what most people would refer to as deep sleep. And then finally the 5th stage is what's called REM sleep. And REM sleep is a brain that is actually very similar to being awake. So in the picture on the left here, what you can see is the awake brain waves across the top where they're very, very, very small and fast. And then right below that, the REM brain, a brain who's in REM sleep, where again, they're pretty small and fast. Below that, you see the other 4 stages of sleep and the brain waves. And just notice that as you progress from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 and 4, the waves get bigger and slower. Now, one of the issues that a lot of students have is understanding how we actually progress through these stages throughout the night. So this diagram here will help you do that. Notice that wherever the line is horizontal, that's the stage that this person is in. So they start off awake for a few minutes, and then they drop down into stage 1, and stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. And then they spend a decent amount of time down in stage 4, down in deep sleep. But then notice, they don't just go straight from 4 to REM. So that's the mistake that most students make, is they just assume we go 4 REM. We don't do that. We in fact go back up. We go back to stage 3 for a brief period, and then stage 2, and then we go to REM. And then notice we kind of do the same circle again. So from REM we go down to stage 2, 3, and then 4, and then we stay down in 4 for a while. And then we go up 3 to REM. So notice there's this kind of cycle throughout the night. Also notice that the first 4 hours of sleep, as shown in this diagram, are when we spend most of our time in deep sleep. So early on in the night, we spend more of our time in stage 4 type sleep. As the night progresses, notice we don't even get into deep sleep once you're at hour 5, hour 6, hour 7 of the night. So you start spending far more time kind of in that stage 2, the lighter stage of sleep, and a lot more time in REM sleep. Now, why is it that we sleep at all? That's a really important question to try and understand. Do you need 8 hours of sleep? How much sleep is appropriate? Well, it turns out 8 hours is just an average, and it totally depends on who you are. Some people function with more, some need less. Generally speaking, as you age, you need less and less. And in fact, older adults typically get less sleep than younger adults. An average 65-year-old may be getting 6.5 hours of sleep a night, whereas an average 20-year-old or teenager may need 8.5 hours of sleep a night. That's not saying that that's what they get, but that research has suggested that that might be how much they need. What if you're not getting the amount of sleep you need to get? Well, not getting enough sleep can have major consequences. If you look at the two charts that are shown here, we've got the one on the left that shows that after the springtime change, so in the spring we spring ahead, so you lose an hour of sleep. So this was from the Monday before they lost the hour of sleep, and then the Monday after they lost the hour of sleep. And notice car accident rates jump very much, very high. On the right graph, this is in the fall. And so in fall, you fall back, so you get that extra hour of sleep. And so again, when we compare the Monday before to the Monday after, you get fewer car accidents after getting that extra hour of sleep. Other psychologists have looked at, well, what happens if we deprive you of one type of sleep? So there was one group of psychologists that every time their subject went into REM sleep, they woke them up. And what they found in that group was they had more problems remembering things from the day. So maybe REM sleep helps us remember things from the day. They did a different study where every time the subjects went into deep sleep, they woke them up. And for that group, they kind of woke up with kind of aches and pains everywhere. So maybe deep sleep is important for kind of helping our body physically recover. More evidence has been shown to this where if you work out a lot during a day or you're very physically active, that night you actually will probably have more deep sleep than you normally have. So your body will actually adjust how much of each type of sleep it needs. If you learn a lot in a day, you're being very stimulated, you have a lot to remember or something like that, that night you're probably going to have more REM sleep than you would normally have. The picture here, by the way, is of a psychologist named Peter Tripp who tried to stay awake as long as he possibly could. He made it about 8.5 days. That's actually not the world record for sleep deprivation. The world record for sleep deprivation, in case you're wondering, is 18 days, 21 hours, and 40 minutes. So, and by the time this is over, usually the person is hallucinating and having some major issues. What about sleep disorders? Well, there's a lot of different ones out there, but here are the big 5. First off, probably the most common sleep disorder is insomnia. Now, insomnia is just generally known as not sleeping, but there are a lot of different types of insomnia. So there are people that have what's called onset insomnia, where they have problems falling asleep. But once they eventually fall asleep, they typically can stay asleep. There are other people that have what's called maintenance insomnia. Someone who has maintenance insomnia has no problem falling asleep, but typically wakes up all the time. So insomnia has different causes and different explanations depending on what kind you're talking about. Probably the most interesting of the sleep disorders is narcolepsy. If you've ever seen narcolepsy in movies, you should forget that you've ever seen it. For example, there was a movie about 15 years ago that came out called Deuce Bigalow, and there was a narcoleptic that would fall asleep while throwing a bowling ball, and she would sleep as she's flying down the bowling alley. This doesn't really happen with narcolepsy. A narcoleptic has issues with their REM sleep occurring when it's not supposed to. So one of the keys to REM sleep is that your brain is very active, but so you don't have an active body at that time, your body becomes paralyzed. So you can imagine that if you start to experience REM while you are awake, your body may become paralyzed. The other thing that happens during REM sleep that your book goes into is a lot of dreaming. Well, you can imagine how interesting and how maybe terrifying it might be to start dreaming when you are not actually asleep. So someone who has narcolepsy could have that aspect of REM sleep start to happen when they're wide awake. And so they start dreaming, and it's actually a type of hallucination. I have put links to videos to see more about narcolepsy as well on the course page. All right, well, what about sleep apnea? Sleep apnea is one of the more dangerous of the sleeping disorders because someone who has sleep apnea stops breathing while they sleep. This isn't just snoring, this is actually stopping breathing while they're asleep. So this is something to watch for if you share a room with someone. If they ever kind of pause with their breathing, they should go to a clinic to get checked out. There are different kinds of sleep apnea. One involves your brain not telling your body to breathe anymore while you're asleep. This is what's called central sleep apnea. And then there are a type of sleep apnea known as obstructive sleep apnea, where there's actually something blocking the airway in the person's throat, causing them to stop breathing while they're asleep. One of the more fascinating issues is sleepwalking. We don't know a lot about what causes sleepwalking. We know that it seems to be age dependent, so younger people tend to sleepwalk and many people will outgrow it, but not everyone does. We also know that it will not occur during REM sleep. As we mentioned earlier with narcolepsy, REM sleep, your brain is very active, but your body becomes paralyzed. So during sleepwalking, your body can't be paralyzed, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be able to walk. So it does not happen during REM sleep. It seems to happen during deep sleep. This is also links back to that very first slide where you guys did those true-false questions. If REM sleep is when we dream, and you can't sleepwalk in REM, then obviously you cannot be acting out your dreams when you sleepwalk. What about restless leg syndrome? This is one that's made the news more recently. People call it RLS. There are medications that have come out for it and so on. Restless leg syndrome is a real syndrome. The idea with it is that as you start to fall asleep, or right before you fall asleep, in about the 5 to 10 minutes before you fall asleep, your legs become extremely sore. Imagine if you've ever had like your arm fall asleep and you get that kind of tingly feeling. It's like that, but worse. You have shards of glass, is what people describe it as, piercing their nerves, their legs. And the only way to make it feel better is to move their legs. That's the idea of restless leg syndrome. So they keep moving their legs and therefore can't really fall asleep. So there are now medications out there to try and treat this disorder. That concludes the sleep lecture. If you do have questions, please let me know.